And joining us now on the debate for the full hour tonight, in Chicago, Illinois, Charles Whelan, author of 10 and a Half Things No Commencement Speaker Has Ever Said. And with us here in studio, John Della Costa, founder of the Center for Ethical Orientation, Michael Beckerman, president of Ariad Communications, an advertising and marketing company, Sarah Prevet, founder of BetaKit, an online publication reporting on emerging technology, and Janice Stein, director of the Munk School of Global Affairs at the University of Toronto. And Charles, let me welcome you to the program. Good to have you on the line from the Windy City, and to you four here in the studio, pleasure to see you as well. Charles, your Wall Street Journal article was quote-unquote liked on Facebook by 100,000 people, which suggests to me you're onto something. 100,000 and counting, we should say. Where did the idea for this uncommencement speech of yours come from?
The whole thing was a complete accident, to the extent that a book can be written by accident. So as you said in your intro, I was a speechwriter at age 23, so I had written these conventional talks. I was invited back to Dartmouth, my alma mater, to give the class day speech, which comes before the commencement speech. Conan O'Brien was actually the commencement speaker. And I knew I could not give them the conventional advice. I thought back on me sitting in their place 23 years earlier, and I didn't set out to write the anti-commencement speech. I just set out to write the stuff that I wish people had told me. The speech went over fairly well, and that kind of bounced around like the Wall Street Journal piece, and only then did we think there was a book in it, and then 10 and a Half Things was born. Do
you have any idea as to why people go give these commencement speeches in the sort of conventional pull your socks up higher, tighten your belt, work harder, get up earlier? Why do we do it that way?
I think that you have a conventional speech is given by a 45-year-old, 55-year-old successful person talking about success. The typical recipient is a 22-year-old or an 18-year-old who does not feel like they are ready to lead the country, lead the world. They don't know what they're going to do. They have no money. They're feeling somewhat lost. And success feels very elusive and far away. So what they want to hear about, I think, is more about the journey and more about the tough stretches, and in an odd way that's kind of reassuring.
Okay, that's what we're going to talk about over the course of the hour this evening. John, get us started here. When you read his piece, first impressions?
First impression was that I wished there had been a way of bringing people forward into a positive. I appreciated the realism. But there's still a transitional point, a ritual of passage that I wished had been explored.
Mike, how about you?
I think I'm the same way in terms of where John is. I'm a big one in terms of personal empowerment and positive thinking and experiences, and that life is part of the journey. And I think maybe there was an opportunity to talk about the process moving forward as opposed to something that I felt was a little bleak.
Bleak, but funny as hell. You got to admit, that was a great piece.
I thought it was funny. I didn't think it was funny as hell, but it was funny.
Okay. Janice, how many commencement speeches have you given in your 30-plus years at the University of Toronto?
6 or 7.
6 or 7?
Yeah, not only the University of Toronto, but elsewhere as well.
Elsewhere as well. So, okay, what did you think of what Charles had to say?
Well, I tend to agree with the people around the table here. Sorry, Charles. The way you just talked about it now was actually, to me, more positive than the 10 and a Half Things, because he said there are tough stretches. And that's right, there are, but they're tough stretches along a road that has a positive objective. So some of the things that Charles said, I've actually said. Not in those words, let me tell you.
But you're not funny as hell.
I'm not funny at all. Not at all. But they're anchored with a more positive vision. I actually think 22-year-olds, 23-year-olds are really, many of them idealistic. They want to hear, they're committed, they're a great generation. I work with them all the time. They actually want to hear that there are some worthwhile things to struggle for.
Well, we're going to go through some of the things on his list as we go through the program today. But Sarah, you're not 22, but you're the closest one to 22 of anybody at this table here. What are you, 20?
I'm not announcing that on air.
Okay, all right. But you're the closest one to a university graduate of anybody on this program tonight. So, you saw the 10 and a Half Things. What'd you think?
I loved it. I thought it was great. It was the first time in a long time I read something and I thought, this resonates with me. I understand it. It's relatable. And it is true. I mean, your years out of university are tough and they're full of struggle. And I think he was right on point.
I want to go around now and find out how many of you actually remember who spoke at your university commencement and whether you remember a single thing about what that person had to say. Charles, start us off. How about you?
I can't remember her name. I remember the day was hot. I remember where I was sitting. And I remember one phrase, which is better, I think, than most people. She used the phrase affluenza, which was this description of people who are too comfortable and therefore don't go out and change the world. And that has stuck with me. I look around and I see that, but the rest of it is lost to the ages.
Mike, where'd you graduate from?
I am a proud graduate of English literature from the University of British Columbia. And I remember my commencement day very vividly. I was working for Labatt Breweries that summer, and I was setting up at a golf tournament at UBC, and I heard the school bells go, and I thought, you know what? Today was the day of my commencement, and I missed my commencement. But I shot, it was the first time I broke 100 on a golf course, so it was a fair trade-off.
So you have no idea who spoke at your commencement. You remember nothing about it, obviously.
I went to UBC.
Enough said. Yeah. It's the left coast, Charles, for what that's worth. John, how about you?
I was at school in Chicago, a school called Rosary College at the time, called Dominican University today.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Adlai Stevenson, Jr., senator then, spoke to us. And it was very much, I mean, this was the tail end of the Vietnam War, was beginning to wind down. And so the issues, because we actually had students who were Vietnam vets, that he talked about in terms of rebuilding and regenerating public purpose, stuck with us, I think, in a deeper way.
Now, let me just confirm. This is the guy who ran against Ike twice?
Yep.
No, this is the
Or
son.
his son?
His son.
His son.
Junior.
Okay, Junior. Janice, how about you?
Oh, I don't remember the name. I'm like Charles, but I remember the speech because
Which university are we talking?
It was McGill
Okay.
University, and it was just 9 months after John Kennedy was assassinated. These are tough times. So this was all about the challenges that the United States and those that lived with the United States faces. So I remember it very, very clearly.
But not who gave it.
Can't remember the name, that's all.
Man or woman?
Man.
Okay. Sarah?
I don't remember the commencement speech because I wasn't there. I dropped out of university and in my third year to do my own startup.
Well, this suggests that Charles is really onto something, because the fact of the matter is you're the only guy, John, who remembers the name of the speaker at your commencement, and it's because the guy's the son of a legend.
But we remember the
I think
content.
I think Charles is onto something, because Conan O'Brien was actually the commencement speaker. So when you look at the juxtaposition, I suspect that he probably provided much more substantive material than they got the next day. I don't know. But to have a comedian, a celebrity, as a commencement speaker also talks about what this rite of passage has become. It's an entertainment event.
Right.
So Charles's information may have been the most lasting material or most substantive material for those students.
Well, I hope this is a good time then to get into this next question, because, as a matter of fact, Conan O'Brien's journey from university graduate to where he is right now, you know, for a guy who does what he does, was really quite topsy-turvy and quite dramatic. And I want to just get a sense of all of your respective paths from that university, Sarah, that you dropped out of, to where you are today. And again, Charles, start us off if you would. We know where it started for you. We know where you are right now. Tell us about the path.
Well, I actually agree with what came up earlier, that there needs to be some optimistic wrap or inside of the speech. And my message, including the worst days lie ahead, had, I think, what was an optimistic ending. So, but I told them about the rough patches, and I think that's the candid part that resonates. So I said, look, after I graduated from college, I went around the world for 9 months. It was a very important time for me. I got a job writing for a newspaper, so I came back with some clips. I saw the world, but I came back and I had no money, and I mean no money, and I had no job. And because a couple things went the wrong way, it turned out I had no place to live either. So I went back to the college town where I'd gone to school. I moved in with a 70-year-old couple who had helped me out with a newspaper. The guy was a retiree of the same college. He was 50 years older than I was. And there I was, a year out of college with no job, no money, no place to live. And every night they would cook dinner for me, and I would sit on the couch with the two of them watching the evening news, thinking, I'm living with a 70-year-old couple. My life cannot get any worse. Right about that time was when I got the job with the governor's office and became a speechwriter. So just when it was really dark, there was a glimmer of hope. But boy, it was pretty dim there for a while.
No, but that is an indication that it is always darkest before the dawn, and once the dawn came, you were off to the races, apparently, yes?
Yes, and I think that for the students who are still looking at the dark, it is this combination of, you know, really being candid about what went wrong with, look, at the end of the day, if you're talented and you work hard, there is something that comes out the other end. So don't feel like you're alone, because you're the one right now who doesn't have a job, doesn't know where you're going, and so on.
Mike, it started, I guess, for you on the golf course after the commencement you didn't attend.
Yes.
But what was the path after that?
Yeah, you can't make the PGA Tour shooting a 98, apparently. I was fortuitous. It was a lot of the people that I met have very much shaped my career. And one of my mentors as I was growing up was a gentleman that ended up working at Nike, and I ended up following him. I spent 13 years at Nike and had the good fortune of running advertising for Nike in Europe and spending a handful of years in Hong Kong, and continued to move along in terms of my marketing and branding career. And now happy to be running a marketing agency of about 100 people, and proud to be doing it.
You're not only proud to be doing it, go ahead.
Can I say?
Tell us about the honor. Go ahead.
Okay,
You
well,
deserve it.
I was pleased to hear a couple weeks ago that we were named one of the top places to work in Canada.
You can do better than that. You were one of the top 10 places for businesses of your size, 100 people, in the whole country.
I was a Canadian way of saying what you said, so I appreciate you taking it a step further than that. And one of the top 10 places to work for women as well.
Oh,
but
great.
thank you very much. Yes, but for me it was all about life experiences. And my university time was interesting theory and academic, but I missed out on the common sense things. And my years after university, I was just smart enough to recognize I wasn't the smartest person in the room, and I sat around and I learned from a bunch of very smart marketing and business leaders, and we're able to evolve that experience into where I am now.
John, your journey.
I was just a very, very serious student. As a matter of fact, I was in a seminary studying for the priesthood. So I zigged out of that when I graduated and got into the advertising business, which was the equivalent of high tech in the 1970s. So I basically had my adolescence in that business, eventually became the CEO of a company in my early 30s, realized I didn't know what I was doing, took the advanced management program at Harvard, kind of figured out that nobody knew what they were doing when it came to managing business and social responsibility. So I left the advertising business behind, got into business ethics, and have been writing and doing ethics work ever since. So very much a life journey, very much trying to figure out what the skills are and how to apply them in ways that can have impact and make a living. So joyful, creative, and disturbing kind of way of doing it.
And disturbing. Janice, after McGill, how did it go?
Went so boring, really. In comparison, the three of you went right to graduate school.
Where?
At Yale. I did draw. I was in the first class of women admitted to Yale, so that was interesting. And then I committed the unpardonable sin of dropping out of Yale to get married. And that's a whole story in itself, what the leadership of Yale said to me about my traitorous behavior.
Traitorous as in, how dare you forsake us for this guy?
Yeah, for one man, that's right.
Who you're still married to.
Whom I'm still married to.
So it was a pretty good deal then.
From my perspective, it was a great deal. And I said to them, there are many graduate schools, but there's only one man. But they did not like that answer.
Oh, I bet Michael did.
Yes.
Yeah, that's nice.
And then we went on in academic life, but have changed, even though I've stayed in academic life, have changed my responsibilities and my challenges over and over and over again.
What was the big break, though, that got you out of the wedding and into
where
you are?
It's really I was always committed to public education. There was a research piece, but what I felt very, very strongly was university people, if they could, have an obligation to give back and to speak about their research. And so I started with somebody called Steve Paikin, and that then led to a second life, really, talking about big issues in public, and then took on a leadership role inside the University of Toronto, which is different. I knew I didn't know what I was doing. I did not, and there's no manual for that, so learned along the way. And nothing I learned in graduate school was any help to me whatsoever at any stage.
Now, you and I, darling, have been together for 18 years.
Yes.
You and Michael have been together for?
47.
Oh my goodness, good for you. Isn't that something? Okay, Sarah, your story.
Well, so I grew up in a technology company. I had the great fortune of working for a real visionary entrepreneur when I was 16 years old. Got to learn and cut my teeth in a variety of roles.
Who was this?
Joel McLean. It's an Infotech research group down in London, Ontario. Still a great, thriving company.
What were you doing there at 16?
You know, I did everything. I mean, I was doing anything that they wanted me to do, and I got into PR, and then I got into HR. I was hiring people. people.
you in high school?
And yeah, you know, that you want to talk about stress. Try sitting across from somebody who's clearly trying to size you up, thinking, "Is this kid old enough to drink?" And so.
No, but really, Sarah,
But really,
weren't you supposed to be in high school at that time?
But you know, I was doing it in the summers and part time, and I got more and more involved with the business, and fell in love with technology, and really fell in love with the opportunity and where everything seemed to be going.
And university, therefore, was not a huge help to you?
So it's terrible. I mean, I went to university even though I probably shouldn't have. And Joel himself was trying to push me to go to business school, which would have made more sense than what I did, which I took political science. I spent every day wondering what I was doing and how this was going to help me, you know, launch my tech career. And so eventually, I just I dropped out and started my first company, which went terribly, by the way, failed miserably, opinion. And you know, it's my whole path. I think the common thread has been the incredible people that have been around me and supported me, and you know, the opportunities that come through your network.
I think that's a couple common themes of all of us that have been speaking about where we've been and how we got here. Is it seemed like we all ended up following our passions and something that we love to do, and it seemed like there were either mentors or networks that helped shape us and opened up some doors for us.
So when Charles says the time you spent in the fraternity basement is not wasted, well, I wasn't in the fraternity basement, but the time you spent with friends and meeting people and looking up to people whom you find inspirational and connecting with those people is never wasted.
Well, darling, the reason you and I are together 18 years is because you always provide the best segues. You just have that sixth sense. Because guess what I'm going to read right now? Here's number one on the top 10 and a half things that were part of Charles's speech. This one's called "Your Time in the Fraternity Basements Was Well Spent." The same goes for the time you spent playing intramural sports, working on the school newspaper, or just hanging with friends. Research tells us that one of the most important causal factors associated with happiness and well-being is your meaningful connections with other human beings. Look around today. Certainly one benchmark of your post-graduation success should be how many of these people are still your close friends in 10 or 20 years. Charles, let me start with you on that. What in particular resonated with you about that advice?
Well, I hadn't actually thought about the networking effect, which has come up already, which I think is also very important. But I wanted to marry the advice to the work that I had done since I left Dartmouth, which is in the field of public policy and economics. And one of the ascendant subfields is this notion of happiness and well-being research. So what is it that actually makes us happy? If you studied economics, you remember you have this kind of amorphous theoretical concept of utility that nobody can actually measure. So we've gone better than that now. And we want to know what makes people feel like they've lived fulfilled lives of purpose. And it turns out that at the top of every list, every time you study this, is meaningful connections with other people. So I wanted to reinforce that notion, not just at university, but beyond, that if you are somehow disconnected from people, it's going to be very hard for just about everything else to fall into place. And conversely, if you have meaningful relationships with friend, family, spouse, people you knew in school, then that's probably the most important thing you can do as you work your way through life.
Mike, does this resonate?
Oh, bang on.
Yeah?
Woohoo, as we would say. I think what's exciting about this generation that's coming through is the size of their networks, right? Like when we were graduating, I'd need to get somebody's mailing address and keep in touch, and I was not going to be doing that. But you think of how with social media, the ability to keep in touch with the people that are part of your formation of who you are as you're growing up through life, and the size of your networks consequently as well. And so there's an interesting tension within that. You're going to know more people, you're going to be able to keep in touch with more people, and also your university years are going to kind of define who you are in a lot of those people's minds. If you were a jerk in university, odds are it's going to be very difficult to rebrand yourself when you're sitting across from the person as a potential client 15 years down the road.
John?
So I think the social network side and the size of the universe is huge, and also the notion of being true to your values when you're in university is going to be important as you grow up.
And again, where there's an opportunity to transition is that we understand, because of social media, the personal importance of friends, personal importance. But there's increasing evidence in the sociological literature, in the social justice literature, that the prism of friendship is actually really important to deal with problems like sustainability, international relations, that it is a way of thinking about our relationships together. So the problem of thinking about friendship in the way that it benefits me is that we're back in the utility model. We're back in sort of what got us into a lot of the messes that we're in. Whereas this concept of friendship in its more expansive and sort of relational possibilities actually becomes a solution. So how do you deal with diversity in Canada? By beginning to really frame the discipline and the maturity of what friendship really means in our relations with each other. So at a moment where people are changing, that would be an opportunity to sort of begin to plant seeds for that.
Janice, you graduated McGill almost 50 years ago, is that right? Are there people that you graduated?
Not quite, but
Well,
you're
said-
not way off.
You said after JFK was assassinated,
That's
so
right.
that's we're in the ballpark.
Right.
Anybody you're still friends with from that
Oh,
time?
yeah.
There are, eh?
Oh, yeah. Not only do I have friends from that time, but even some of my a faculty member. We stayed in touch all those years. We connected, a woman faculty member, and I was her first really woman student, and we've stayed connected over all these years. It's interesting actually because when you think about social media relationships and the 150 friends, sometimes I worry because I see my students today, the other students in the next room, and they're texting each other and they're not really talking. And you wonder how deep these friendships are going to be when you're looking after 150 and you can't find any time for the 5, 6, or 7 most important. We don't know the answer to that yet,
Great point.
but it's a big question.
Here's another one from Charles's list of top 10 and a half things. Some of your worst days lie ahead.
Absolutely.
Right? That's kind of the opposite of what we're usually told. Some of your worst days lie ahead. Graduation is a happy day, he writes, but my job is to tell you that if you are going to do anything worthwhile, you will face periods of grinding self-doubt and failure. Be prepared to work through them. I'll spare you my personal details other than to say that 1 year after college graduation, I had no job, less than $500 in assets, and I was living with an elderly retired couple, as he told us earlier. The only difference between when I graduated and today is that now no one can afford to retire.
There is no elderly retired couple.
Sarah, you are, you're a long way from retirement age, but anything in that resonates with you?
Well, that was my favorite line out of the whole article.
Yeah.
I thought, and it's something that nobody ever talks about. And even successful people, it's like they want to sort of gloss over the details and gloss over the struggle that they had to take to achieve their success. And I think talking about failure and talking about having to overcome adversity, and there are going to be times where you make mistakes. There's going to be times where you're absolutely embarrassed, mortified, don't want to get out of bed, can't figure out what to do next, and that's when you really need to double down on what's working and look around, and that's those times everyone goes through. Everyone.
Charles, when you said that part of the speech for the first time, what kind of reaction did you get from the student body?
This was the most popular part of the speech.
Yeah.
And when you talk to older people, they think, "Oh boy, you shouldn't. It's such a downer," and everybody would have been depressed. It's it's liberating, as I said earlier. This is something that I learned kind of inadvertently working with undergrads. That when you go talk to a small group in a fraternity or a dorm or something like that, and you give a talk about your career, what you usually do is kind of trace out the arc of your resume. I graduated, then I worked for this business, then I worked for that business, and it seems seamless and effortless. And of course, everybody who's done it knows that it's not. So I began giving a talk about the intersections and interruptions, the bad things that happened between the seemingly effortless arc, and the students loved it. It's kind of, if you have little kids before bed, they always say, "Read me one more story." When you're working with undergrads, it's always, "Tell me one more failure," right? "Tell me about your friends who failed." They can't get enough of it because they see that you come out the other end, as our panelists have shared. That's what I think is such an important lesson.
Michael, doesn't that seem counterintuitive in a way, though? Because, students are going to graduate right now into the teeth of the worst, most miserable economic times of not only their lives, but probably their parents' lives as well. And to tell them, get ready for self-doubt and potentially grinding failure. I mean, that's a hard message at this time, is it not? They're already feeling bad enough about graduating, aren't they?
Well, it's certainly an interesting time, right? And it's a tough time to be graduating if you're going to measure your success based on economics and the economy, right? And I think it's okay to be shameless idealists, right? And you've got to aspire and inspire, and that's where the Mark Kielburgers come from, right? And they all make us that much better. I think if you're going to let the economy or what your paycheck says at the end of the day define your level of success, it's going to be a really tough grind the next little while. But if you're going to be able to find happiness along your journey, I think that's more what it's about.
Janice.
You know, I think we deeply misunderstand the importance of failure. So let me put, and I have this conversation with my students all the time. Let me put it to you this way. If you haven't had an interesting failure in the last year, you haven't tried a thing. You haven't taken a single risk. You've just kept plodding along in the groove.
What if you're a superstar and you just don't fail?
Everybody fails, right? If you're trying things, if you're trying to make anything better, if you're innovating, if you're trying to change anything, you are going to fail. And what I say to my students is, the real trick is to fail for smart reasons.
So learn something out of the failure.
That's right. So occasionally when people ask me for my advice in the private sector, I will walk into a CEO's office and say, tell me about your most interesting smart failure this year. And if they can't answer that question, that company is really in trouble.
Interesting. John, you got anything on that?
Well, very much. That failure, making mistakes, is where wisdom comes from.
Yeah.
We can't get it only through our successes. And I know that when I was going through my midlife crises and failures, Howard Gardner's work on creating minds, where he looked at Picasso, Einstein, Freud, and all these other people. These are people who remade themselves every 10 years. They mastered certain things, but then they took risks and sometimes failed at them. But then that was a process of learning something new, and eventually they mastered something else. But part of that restlessness that we have is to keep experimenting and trying, and experimentation by definition is going to fail.
Charles, let me bounce this part off you, because I get you have run for office as a politician and were unsuccessful in doing so, right?
Yes, that was a great failure.
Well, I want to follow up on that, because I've interviewed.
Yes, a smart failure, right.
I've interviewed hundreds of politicians over the years, and I can't think of a single one who said, running and losing was one of the best experiences because I learned so much. You learn more when you lose than when you win. Do you agree with that?
Well, I can't tell you what it would have been like to win, so I don't know the counterfactual. I can tell you, particularly as somebody who does public policy, that it was a phenomenal experience. I have zero regrets. Now, mine was a relatively short race because it was a special election, so I only had to suffer for 3 months. But in terms of insight into the process, about learning about the electorate in a way that you can never see as an academic, and also just learning about yourself, interacting with people and being out there, really exposing yourself, I thought it was a unique experience. Not one that I appreciated every moment while I was doing it, but looking back, it was just an unbelievable learning experience.
Sarah, you told us your first effort in business failed miserably, but was it, to quote Professor Stein here, a smart failure?
You know, maybe not my first startup that failed, but my second startup almost failed, and I ended up selling that company, pulling it out of the ashes and selling it to Postmedia. So, you know, there are smart failures. There are dumb failures. I mean, there are things, plenty of things I can point to that I shouldn't have done before. But, you know, I think as long as you're taking away, you know, lessons from it, and you're going to, you know what to do next time, and it's going to allow you to see different opportunities and see people differently. I think it changes your perception entirely.
Let's do one more from the top 10.5 list. This one is a bit of a takeoff on the Google theme. Don't make the world worse. Here's Charles writing again. I know that I'm supposed to tell you to aspire to great things, but I'm going to lower the bar here. Just don't use your prodigious talents to mess things up. Too many smart people are doing that already. And if you really want to cause social mayhem, it helps to have an Ivy League degree. You are smart and motivated and creative. Everyone will tell you that you can change the world. They are right. But remember that changing the world also can include things like skirting financial regulations and selling unhealthy foods to increasingly obese children. I am not asking you to cure cancer. I am just asking you not to spread it. Charles, where did this one come from?
Well, that last line is a lead-in to something that was in the speech, which is I gave a very specific example that I remember shortly after I got out of university, and you probably will as well, which is when the 7 tobacco executives appeared before the U.S. Congress, took the oath to Congress and the nation, and proceeded to swear and testify that cigarettes are not addictive. This was in about 1994.
We remember the pictures well.
For 20 years that they were. They were simultaneously obscuring all the relationship between cigarette smoking and cancer. And I remember that iconic photograph of all of them taking the oath at once. And the twist was I asked my research assistant to dig in and find out where they went to college. What I found out was there were a handful of Ivy League degrees. I think there were 3 from Harvard.
Wow.
And what I like about that example is enough time has passed that we can look back and see what it was, which is just naked self-interest, it was naked dishonesty, and it was really bad for the country and the world. And my point is, look, those weren't high school dropouts without any other opportunity. They were very smart people doing something that, with the vision of time, we can see was as close to pure evil as I can come up with, you know, as with a photograph to watch it happening. So don't do that. That was just the point.
John, how does the ethicist on this grouping today respond to, I am not asking you to cure cancer, I am just asking you not to spread it?
This was actually the part of the article that most resonated with me. And I didn't know about the tobacco example that you gave, but what jumped to mind to me is what our tobacco-trained public relations people are doing here in Canada around ethical oil. And one of the things, as I thought about the implications of this, is to be able to look at things like the positioning of a fragile energy resource that's actually complicating our global climate problems and everything else, and to have that word ethics thrust next to it. We need to be able to have a way of deconstructing that, of looking at that critically. So in the same way that you have now given us this example of the tobacco executives, I would say that our youth, and in fact our society, have to look at the dishonesty of those kinds of presentations that are happening now.
Let's do one more on the top 10 and a half list here. How many people here are parents? You're a parent, I know. John? No? Mike, you are? Sarah?
Just of dogs.
Just have dogs? That's pretty close. Charles, you're a parent?
I am a parent, yes.
Are you a parent?
Yes, I have 3 kids.
You have 3 kids?
Oldest is 14.
Okay, well, here's one that's right up the alley of those with kids. Your parents don't want what's best for you. They want what is good for you, which isn't always the same thing. There is a natural instinct to protect our children from risk and discomfort, and therefore to urge safe choices. Theodore Roosevelt, soldier, explorer, president, once remarked, quote, "It is hard to fail, but it is worse never to have tried to succeed." Great quote, but I am willing to bet that Teddy's mother wanted him to be a doctor or a lawyer. Okay, you got kids in university now, right?
No, they're all done.
They're done now?
They're all done.
But did that ring home to you, this notion of, I don't necessarily...
You know, I would put it a little differently, because I see this, again, not only in my personal life, but with students. I don't think parents know what's best. I don't think it's a question of parents not wanting the best, but wanting safe choices. I think the kind of environment that we're living in, which is transforming so quickly, Steve, I think you have to trust young people to make good choices. You have to give young people all the tools, and ethics is part of that. But you know, Charles, one of the issues is when you say to young children, don't spread the cancer, you have to know what the cancer is. In the tobacco case, it's quite easy. In a lot of things we do today in this world, we actually don't know where the harm is.
It's not that clear cut sometimes.
It's not that clear cut. These are tough decisions, and I find, I say to parents all the time, just listen to what your son or daughter wants to do with their life, and they'll be okay. For the reason that you mentioned, if they do something that they care passionately about, that's the best anchor for them as they move
Sarah,
forward.
Your parents, Sarah, did they have a tough time with this one?
Well, you know, I think personally, like my parents have encouraged my entrepreneurship, and you know, I think they provide a safe haven should I ever need one.
But they probably wanted an easier course for you.
You know, I'm sure that it's tough for any parent to see their child fail and still stick by them when they continue to persevere. But at the same time, I think any parent can do their children justice by, you know, instilling confidence in them, teaching them to be resourceful, giving them that sense that no matter what happens, they're going to be okay and they can take those risks. And I think we need more of that in Canada, quite frankly.
Yeah.
As you look, Mike, how many you got kids?
I've got 3.
3 kids. Ages?
17, 16, and 11.
Okay, so the 17-year-old is about to head off to post-secondary, perhaps?
Yes, he is.
And how scared are you for him or her?
I'm scared for his roommate, is what I'm scared for. I've got very little doubt that parents don't know what's best for their kids in this generation, without a doubt. And I know that the kids of this generation are 100% convinced that their parents have no idea how to best help them. So what I think what we've done through readings and through other conversations and those types of things is just trying to instill the kids with a really strong sense of values and making sure that they know who they are and within that mechanism that will provide them the opportunity to make the right decision for who they are.
Okay, but you can't resist giving your oldest some advice about where to go to university, what to take, how easily or hard it's going to be for your kid. I mean, this is what parents do.
Maybe that's what you do. That's not what I do. My job as a parent is to create options for my child and to provide them with the values to make the right decision for them. And I'm also attuned enough to the mindset of a 17-year-old that he probably hasn't heard what I've said for about 4 or 5 years now.
So what's he going to do?
He's going to head off to the United States, I think.
University or college?
Yeah, he'll go off to university in the United States and follow one of his dreams and his passions.
Good. John?
As I was thinking about convocation, about what our generation can say to the upcoming generation, it's exactly like, what advice would we give? We're not the generation that created, for example, peacekeeping or national health care, or, I mean, we didn't build subways in this city. We haven't won a Stanley Cup in Toronto, So to stand there and be the one to give advice to the next generation, I feel like there's a real generation credibility gap too that would make me cautious about standing with prescriptions in front of a group.
45 years and counting for that Stanley Cup.
That's a
generation.
That's a generation.
One more year.
At least. Back to the top 10.5 list. Don't try to be great, Charles tells us. Being great involves luck and other circumstances beyond your control. The less you think about being great, the more likely it is to happen. And if it doesn't, there's absolutely nothing wrong with being solid. Now again, Charles, that is exactly kind of the opposite as the typical convocation speech is supposed to go. So where'd that come from?
It came from television. It actually comes from a public affairs show in Chicago. The host is Phil Ponce. Ironically, I was back on the show last week talking about the book. And Phil's advice, it's filmed live, about 20 seconds before airtime. So when everybody's all tight and they're worried about falling off their stool, he just leans over and he says, don't try to be great, just be solid. And the net effect of that is you can watch the guests just kind of relax. And they say, well, I can do that. I know the content. We'll just have a nice conversation. And of course, Phil has elevated the quality of his guests in the process. So I think you look at sports, where if you go out and try and be great on the first tee, you're not going to shoot your 98 like you did before. You're going to get all tight. So athletes just have to focus on what they know. Business, that's come up already, that if you focus, boy, I'm going to be the top CEO, well, you're going to pass up risks and other things that may be consistent with your passion or may not seem to be taking you in a great direction. So I think there's a lot of value in focusing on what you know, what you can do, what's solid, and then let the greatness take care of itself.
Sarah, I've talked to business leaders, though, who are admittedly older than you, who say that if you don't burn and put every ounce of your being into, beating the other guy, it isn't going to happen for you.
So this is the only part of this article that I didn't agree with.
Okay.
I firmly believe that you should aspire to be unbelievably great. I think that you need to feel deep down that you're destined for greatness. I think you need to try and solve big problems. I think we should be ending each commencement speech by saying there are so many, countless big issues in the world, and we need smart people to solve them. And that's your duty as a smart person, is to go out there and figure out how.
Charles, you want to take that on?
Yeah, so I actually don't think we disagree, because my point is, don't worry about winning the Nobel Prize. Just go work on a problem that you think is important, what you've just described, and then, hey, maybe it'll work out that someone will award you the Nobel Prize because of your work. Same with the CEOs. I don't think anybody's going to deny that you're going to have to really grind away. And in fact, part of the talk about your worst days lie ahead was also about, look, it's just going to be really, really hard for a long time, because that's what it takes to succeed. But I think that this notion of looking at the prizes or becoming the CEO or some of the accolades that we equate with greatness is not the right approach. And focusing on the work and the journey and those kinds of things is really more what it's about. And those may or may not get you on the front of a magazine. The work itself should be its own reward.
Well, I'm going to pick up from something, actually. Mike, let me put this to you. And Charles mentioned this in his book. When you read people's obits, it doesn't mention in their obits, incidentally, he was the 186th best person at what he was doing. Right. If you won, they mention that. So again, is there, don't try to be great? Really? Don't try to be great?
Great's an output, right? I don't think you try to be great. Great's an output, and
not an input.
No, a great is an output. I would have said input if I thought input. great as an output.
So it's a consequence of...
It's a consequence of your journey. And if you have a journey well lived, you're going to end up being great. How you define great.
You see, I think there's actually not a lot of disagreement here, because if I'm reading you right, Charles, you say, don't go for the prize. Don't go for the gold ring. That's not what it's about. It's about taking on something that's important and then breaking your brain around it.
So there's actually...
That's right.
Go ahead, Charles, go in.
There's a metaphor in the book, and it's a real story, and it was in the original speech as well. My wife and I, she wasn't my wife then, but when we were traveling around the world, we were in India, and we were told, we were in West Darjeeling, that we had to take this hike. It was about a 20-kilometer hike. You had to start at about 4 in the morning to get to the top, because when the sun came up, that was the most beautiful place in the whole area to watch the sun come up. So we get up, we hike for 20 kilometers through India as it wakes up, finally get to the top, and it is entirely cloudy. We couldn't even see each other, let alone the sun. And the takeaway was, it was a beautiful walk, because what we got to see was India waking up for 20 kilometers. When we got to the top and couldn't see anything, it was still worth the journey. And we couldn't control whether it was going to be sunny or not. That is the output point. I agree completely with that. So is the journey worth taking? And if it is, then that is its own reward. It may be beautiful at the top, it may not be. That's greatness or not greatness, but think about the 20 kilometers.
But
Nice
even walking up that mountain, you're aspiring for greatness, right? You took that walk because you wanted to be at the top of that mountain, and that's the same thing in an entrepreneurial journey. See, that's hustle, right? You got to be hungry for it. You wanted something. So the journey. I'm not debating the journey. I mean, the journey is important, but you have to be aspiring for something and being hungry for something, and aspiring for greatness is going to lead to that journey. That is going to be the great part.
But so much of what we...
And you're certainly not going to get the view from the top if you stay in bed.
That's for
No
sure.
chance.
Janice and then John.
You know what, there's an interesting riff on this in the sense, this is a Canadian story really, and it's hard to find the balance. For years and years in this country, our Olympic athletes, even our broadcasters, when our athletes would go to the Olympics, told us that these athletes had achieved their personal best. And finally somebody says, that's not enough, right? That's not what it's about. It's not about achieving your personal best. It's actually going for the gold. And that did motivate a lot of people, not only the athletes, but their supporters and everybody, to work a lot harder and to benchmark themselves against the very best. So the story has got a lot of shades of gray in it, and we have to find the balance.
Do you think, can I just do a follow with you on that? Sorry, John, just give me a second here. We were, Canada, the only host country in Olympic history never to win a gold medal on Olympics that we hosted.
Right.
And then suddenly we did the one in British Columbia, and we won more golds than anyone ever.
We exploded.
Do you think what you just said is the reason for that?
Yes.
You do, eh?
Yes. Yes. There's no question about it. So all of a sudden the aspirational goal changed, right? And people stretched, and supporters stretched, and there was much more of a team effort. And the government stepped forward to fund athletes in their training. And so the standard against which you were benchmarking yourself really changed. Now, that's an important part of life.
John.
Again, I think that greatness has to be investigated. We have to ask our questions of what the qualities of greatness are, because so much of our greatness today has been turned into celebrity or the people who win at all costs. So the sports metaphor is a wonderful one, because I worked with Canadian Centre for Ethics in Sport, and this idea of own the podium is very, very compelling. But the ethical criteria is to own the podium the right way. Canada has Ben Johnson in its history. We know what it's like to own the podium the wrong way.
Yes.
So asking the question about excellence in a way that informs, because I think what you've been talking about in terms of the journey is that it's also about our integrity. Like what substance is in that greatness? And too much of what we consider great today is probably quite frivolous.
You know, John, even, I know it's heretical to bring up Don Cherry on such an august educational network like this one, but
I
even-
brought up the Leafs.
And you did. Even Don says, winning without honor, there's no point.
That's
You've
right.
got to win with honor.
Absolutely.
Got to do it the right way. I want to go back to something that I talked about, and Sarah, bring you up at this point. I want to know why anybody should be listening to anything anybody's got to say on this program right now. For those people who are about to graduate into the teeth of this awful economic time, with so much economic uncertainty looking forward, why should they, and particularly for people who, you know, are in their 40s or 50s right now, maybe they should listen to you, you're younger, but you know, for those of us who are 30 years, God forbid, 50 years removed from our university graduation, why should they listen to anything we have to say?
Well, let's be honest. I mean, experience gives an education, and there's knowledge groomed through each of everyone's past here. And I think that's the best thing that we can encourage people to do is to learn from others. And don't make your own mistakes. Learn from others. And I think that the more we can talk about our failures openly and share some of the struggles that we've all faced, in the 10, 20, 30 years coming out of school, it illuminates paths for people, and it shows people, what's possible, and hopefully lets them see that they're not alone when they are in those dark places.
But Mike, you joked just a few moments ago about your 17-year-old's about to go off to university and hasn't listened to you in 4 or 5 years. Does this generation care what we have to say about this?
I think they sure do, if you treat them with respect. I have the great opportunity of working with probably an average age of about 25-year-olds, and I learn from them every single day.
This is in your workplace?
In my workplace. And if I take the time to really listen and ask the right questions and provoke debate, I'm inspired by their depth of knowledge and their depth of caring and the values that they choose to subscribe to. So like with any learning opportunity or with any mentorship opportunity, it's a two-way street, and both are going to benefit from it.
Charles, where are you on that question?
I do think that there's a hunger for experience. I think that's why the original speech kind of caught a wave. I think it's true even later in life. So I just finished reading the Steve Jobs biography, and you look at his very interesting life and his setbacks and being fired by his own company and some of his personal failings, but some of his genius, and you learn from it. So I think that at every age, but particularly when you're young and you don't have that many of your own experiences to draw on, I do think there is a hunger to consume the other experiences, good and bad, of the people around you. I think it's great value.
Janice, 'tis the season when Chancellor David Peterson at your university is going to shake hands with, thousands upon thousands of graduates from the University of Toronto, where you teach. Do these young students, are you pessimistic about their future, given what they're about to graduate into?
No, not one bit. I mean, it's really remarkable because we have a class graduating very, very shortly, and what you see is terrific resilience, number one. A sense that if there's no job, that's fine, we're going to start up. We're going to start up something. We're going to start up an NGO. We're going to start up a small consulting firm. We're going to start up an environmental firm. And the kids themselves are extremely committed and energetic. And just to follow on your point, actually the best teams are multi-generational. If they're all, if they're all horizontally in the same cohort, they actually bore each other. But when you mix in the room, different generations, the shared experience, but you have to do what you just said. You have to really listen and not assume that your experience trumps all.
I'm going to ask John Della Costa to comment on the front of the New Yorker with all of these soon-to-be graduating students sitting on icebergs adrift. Is that the way it is?
Well, those are ice drifts adrift in a time of global warming, so they're dwindling icebergs
even worse
on
then.
top of it. And I do think it echoes, and there are people who have looked at what happened during the Depression with the lost generation. And so there is cause for concern, but I think it's a policy cause. It's not a cause in terms of the resources that the young generation have. I think it's about what our political condition making is, so that we are creating the best opportunities for those startups to succeed. So in a sense, our responsibility is to strengthen that ice.
If you stayed in school and graduated, and were graduating today as opposed to X number of years ago, would you be nervous about graduating into this economy at this time in our history?
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure I would be nervous about job security, things like that. But at the same time, it's an unprecedented time. The connections, the technology that's available to you to be able to find opportunities, to be able to build your network. I mean, it's never in the history of mankind have you been this plugged in and had this sort of global presence. So I think that in itself is providing an unbelievable foundation, but also this sense of entrepreneurialism. I've never seen this much excitement, hustle happening in Canadian youth, and I'm pumped. I think the next 10 years are going to be very, very exciting for the country as a whole.
That's a great place to leave it. I want to thank Charles Whelan for being there on the line from Chicago, Illinois for us, from the Harris School of Public Policy at the University of Chicago. Charles, great speech, great book, and thanks so much for this very atypical look at a non-commencement speech. We got to take a closer look at this.
It's fun to talk to you. Thank you.
Good. Thanks so much for being there for us. Sarah Prevette from Beta Kit, good to have you on the program. Michael Beckerman from Ariad Communications. John Della Costa, the Center for Ethical Orientation. Janice Stein, the Munk School of Global Affairs. Thanks, everybody.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.